Okay, so we are all ready to get started. So thank you all for joining us here for this panel. It's going to be a conversation about assessing risks in AI, and the subtext is going to be due diligence for how do you know when you want to get involved with a company, right? When you want to invest in the company, when that sort of thing. I have far more questions than I have answers, so let me just jump right to introducing the panel. So we have joining us here today is Jason Soma, and Jason is a shareholder with Saxton and Stump, and he's in their intellectual property group, and he has over 15 years of experience as a patent attorney and as a business consultant, and he's worked with clients in this very specific area, trying to help them get funding, trying to go through the due diligence that's required. So thank you, Jason. And this was I probably shouldn't say, this was your idea.
This was my idea, yeah.
And I don't say it like that because I like the idea. I think it's a great idea, and I'm glad we can have this conversation. But this is specifically in Jason's wheelhouse. This is what you do, and you help among the things that you do to help your clients. So thank you for coming and having this conversation with us here today. And then we also have joining us is Shrikar Gade, and Shri is a managing partner for Blue Tree VC, a Series A investment fund headquartered in Pittsburgh, and he leverages his background in engineering, law, and business to assist portfolio companies to efficiently use the capital to bring solutions to markets. And so you're sort of the money guy, right? So we have the lawyer and the money guy, and I'm going to have a bunch of questions for both of you. But what I would like to do is give you the opportunity to start and just tell us your basic thoughts. Jason, I'll start with you. Open-ended question. I'd like to start it by asking, what do you want the audience to have in mind as we dive into this subject matter?
Yeah, so I think that the biggest thing that I would take away, because this room is mostly full of lawyers and policymakers, is to remember that fundamentally these technologies are conduits to solve problems for people and customers. And so one of the things that we need to be aware of when advising our clients and building these things is that we're not defeating that ultimate purpose, because ultimately we're looking at the guide rails, the legal ramifications, the policy ramifications, but at the end of the day, the technology still needs to solve a problem, and if it doesn't solve a problem, it's not going to be investable because it's not going to end up generating revenue back to the investors and doing what that technology needs to do.
So it actually has to work.
Yes. It has to work on a number of different levels. It can't just be that it functionally works and you can build it. It actually has to do something and solve a problem for people.
So we can't put like the letter I in front of our domain name like you did during the .com, like
that is the thing that technologists and companies and startups have done for generations, and I think we've seen that in the .com era. We saw it with crypto and blockchain a few years ago, and I think we're maybe at the tail end of that with artificial intelligence, I hope. And I think we're on the precipice of maybe getting to a place where the fakes and the technologies that really aren't going to do that are going to fall by the wayside, but I don't think we're quite there yet.
Okay, all right, great, thanks a lot, Jason. And Shri?
Yeah, from my perspective, as much as there is risks out there and there are reasons to be worried, there's a lot of amazing use cases for the current AI algorithms that are out there, whether it's machine learning, deep learning, expert systems, and many more to come. The only concern that we really see is separating the hype of people who say they're an AI company against those who have a real solution leveraging one of the different things to solve a real problem.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. And what I should also say is in the program and online we had, Allison Gall was going to join this. Unfortunately, she's become sick and is not available, so we wish her well. But guys, it's going to be the three of us having this conversation today. And Jason, let me kick it back to you because I know you have some specific things you want to lay out to get us going and to talk about. So you want to run with it?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that, again, like ultimately at the end of the day, like we have to be mindful really of like the risk allocation of these technologies against the businesses that are being developed, whether it's a startup or whether it's a new product line in a company, and understanding whether it's something that's a real serious risk to the business case or whether it's something that is a minor risk, and how big of a deal is it going to be relative. Like, is it something that's going to be a company or a product killer that's going to take your company down if it fails, or if you go ahead and you do something like train your large language model on the entirety of the internet as opposed to going out and getting licenses and actually having the legal right to do what you're doing? Or is it something that the risk profile of what you're doing is so small that it's justifiable? I mean, if you're building a proof of concept and you want to run the free version of ChatGPT in order to see whether or not you can actually build a chatbot in your product, that's one thing. It's another thing if you go out and, again, scrape the internet, build your large language model, stick it in front of a healthcare app that's going to potentially diagnose patients and kill them. So there's a big difference in that space, and really understanding what your use case is, and then also like what kind of optionality do you have? If you're building a proof of concept, you can do things and you can run things and you can be much less risk averse because the potential damages that you're going to cause or the issues that you would run into from a legal perspective really aren't there.
Shrink, your thoughts on that?
So I'll follow up with that. So it's simple, and I'll follow up on some of the previous panels we've had. So in my world, the companies are early, very early. So they haven't trained their models on multiple years worth of data. So unwinding some of this stuff is actually a little bit easier. And so going to Jason's point, sometimes the risk we're not analyzing is not so much the risk of the solution that they're using now, but the risk of them being able to remove that solution and put a real one in place. So for example, a lot of our companies may, for their customer service side of their business, leverage something like ChatGPT. Again, this is a proof of concept. It's not the core of their product. And the fact of the matter is if they lose access to ChatGPT, can they build something else? Can they just go back to customer service for a little while, build their own LLM, and then come back in with a better, more improved LLM? Yes. So that's a lower risk solution as opposed to one of our companies building what they're selling their customers on, leveraging a tool, a generative AI model, a machine learning algorithm, where they don't know where the data came from, and suddenly being able to, having to say, going to Jen's comment from the last conference or the last panel, look, this is a great tool, but we can't sell it in Europe, and suddenly closing out whole markets because they don't know what they use to actually train their own models. And so that's where we actually spend a lot of our time talking to our companies about where the appropriate risk-reward balances lay in the decisions that they're making.
Do you find that they're open to that conversation, or are they closed-minded? And
No.
The reason I ask that in that way, I suspect the answer is some, it depends, and so forth, and we can go through that. But I see an awful lot of people who, I'll call them pretenders. They think, oh, I can code. Oh, I can do AI. I can add this model. And you tell them, it's like, well, have you taken X, Y, and Z into account? It's like, well, why would I do that? It can slice, it can dice. Well, because it matters.
Yes. So that's a really quick way for me to determine whether or not I'm going to put money behind the company. Mm-hmm. Most of them come to us saying we have a solution. Actually, all of them come to us saying we have a solution. Almost every time it is a solution where either they say we use AI, in which case I press them on, what do you mean AI? Like, do you mean machine learning, generative AI, deep learning? Is it structured, unstructured data? Where's your data coming from? And they can never answer any of those questions. In which case, then it's talking to them through, here's the risk of that, here's the issues that's going to cause for you to get money from us down the road, and if you were to ever sell your company, here's the issues it's going to bring up down the road. Generally, most of our entrepreneurs are more willing to listen to that once you start to put it into dollars and cents and pros and cons and consequences for them. There are those that come to us and tell us, it doesn't matter, we're just going to sell this solution, it's going to work, and we walk away. And I have that ability, so that's very nice.
Yeah, yeah. So they're just honest with you. We're here.
Oh no, they lie all the time. Half of my job is digging in, and that's why we ask those questions, is to dig in. Because half of the time they'll say, we know where our data came from. It's like, so okay, how much data did you use to train this model? Where did the data come from? Do you own rights to it? How long do those rights exist? What happens when those rights expire? How does that affect your model? When you start digging in that and they realize that you're asking real questions to which they don't have the answers to, that's when the reality comes.
How do they convincingly tell you what they trained their model on? If it's in the past, that's an interesting question. I'd like to.
So the question is, how do they tell you with any truth or reliability what they trained the model on?
So for us, because our companies are relatively small, the data that they're using and the models they're using are relatively smaller models. So we are generally not working with generative AI models. We're generally working with machine learning algorithms that are trained up on specific industry data, and they can either point me to industry data that they pulled it from or clients whose data they've pulled, and we can look at the contracts that they have with their clients to go through the data and see whether, or the data rights, to see whether or not they have real ownership rights to that data, and that's actually very important to us.
That scale up, if you went to a very large data set, what would you look for there to be convincing?
So going to the previous panel, at some point we would probably say, you either need to go to the data provider and get a letter, basically an opinion letter from their law firm saying they have the ownership, or you need to convince us that this is more of a proof of concept. We have access to this other data that we're going to use to train up a new model on moving forward. Because of where we stand and because of where the world stands right now, and these are very early stage companies and I can afford to walk away, if I'm not convinced about the data ownership, we will walk, because it is just too much of a risk that somewhere down the road, the entire company will be shut down, we'll face legal issues, any number of bad things can happen, that the risk just exceeds the reward.
You know, and I think there's a different paradigm depending on, again, like what domain you're in, what kind of artificial intelligence technologies you're looking at. If you're building this giant large language model like OpenAI did, it's going to be a lot harder to figure that out. But if it's particularly in things like in the life sciences, you're seeing in some of these machine learning technologies in the companies that Sri's running across, you do have a data set that is sort of well defined, or that they're running their training algorithms over top of, and you'll know. And then you go and get licenses from it. You make sure that they do have the rights to actually use them. And I think that, going back over to the generative AI space, last week it was that Google and Reddit announced a $60 million a year licensing deal on top of Reddit's training data. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that over time, because as these lawsuits that have been percolating over the last year come to fruition, the whole paradigm is going to get sorted out eventually. I mean, like, we saw this with software 30, 40 years ago at the advent of that, and I think it's just we're going to see something like that happen again over the next few years.
Yeah, and so we have two of our companies that are using this, and I can give you kind of two examples of where we've kind of pushed on it. One is a company that is scraping the USPTO data and some research databases for information about patents or research about topics to help R&D teams understand that. And so we worked with them to understand, one, are they allowed to scrape that data? Two, what are the usage rights and what can they use it for and what can't they use it for? And worked with them kind of really on understanding that. And that was one half of it, and that was interesting. The other half of it is also helping them understand what is the question that they're trying to answer. It's one thing to have a large data set. Unlike a generative AI model where it's trying to predict the next word in a conversation, these are typically more narrow problems. So is this the right data set for it? How do you narrow what you're teaching the data set on? Why do you do it? So there are questions around that we kind of dig into. A second version was more closely related to the generative AI, which was energy regulation. So they're helping companies fill out FARC, the federal energy regulatory forms. And they're sourcing all the data from the companies and from the previous forms that are all online and searchable. One of the big issues for them was, how do we make sure that there's no hallucinations? Not minor. There can be absolutely no hallucinations. How do you guarantee that? So it was really working with them on understanding their algorithms to understand how it was that they weren't able to do as strong things as other AI algorithms might be, but they were able to guarantee that there was no hallucinations. So that's kind of what we're working on.
And to that point, I think that there was a point that's been brought up before about the credibility of these models. And these are two business cases where your customers are going to care very deeply about the accuracy of these models because you're selling into regulatory groups and to lawyers. And there probably are no two groups as far as customers that care about the quality of your data and what it's been trained on.
We have one question.
Sure, go ahead.
If you could clarify about the data that you care about, is it that you want to make sure that you're not prohibited from the company, that they weren't prohibited from using that data to train a model, or are you looking for affirmative consent from maybe wherever they gathered that data that, yes, you can use it for this purpose?
In these two cases, it was affirmative consent. We wanted to make sure, for two reasons. We want to make sure that they had access to it now for the training. We want to make sure they didn't lose access to it in the future in case there needed to be retraining or the lack of access would actually affect the ability to use the model ever in the future. So for that, we wanted actual affirmative consent written into our contracts that they could use the data.
So, sorry to follow up, but so you wouldn't be able to go very, very deep, very in the past because of the concept may not have existed at the time when the data was collected.
Correct.
Thank you.
Well, and I think to that end, and I think so the question in the audience was that you couldn't really necessarily go back too deep in time because you couldn't get consent for data that never contemplated these models. And I think that that's something we're seeing in other contexts. And one point that I think is important to take away is don't forget the basics of copyright law and other intellectual property laws that we've learned and developed over time for other technologies. So music licensing has been like that for a long time. And we had remixing, you look at if you stream television shows on streaming platforms, a lot of the music that was licensed into the television shows is not available on the streaming platforms because it wasn't contemplated at the time. And so I think that you're going to see similar problems with data licensing, particularly for copyrighted data that's it's still in existence from like 1930 to present. I mean, I've seen some people try to just train the data models completely on public domain information and cutting out anything from 1930 to the present. I think that's extreme because I think there are ways that you can get around that, and potentially, in some cases, people are trying to rely on fair use, but that's troubling, and you only know what fair use is when you actually get litigated.
Right.
And so, but like those are the risk allocation and thoughts that we all look at when I'm advising clients who are looking to raise capital and going to people that are very diligent about it, like Sri. Versus, there's also venture capitalists that take the opposite approach. They look at the large language models and just the need for data, and they see that data is going to be their moat, and they're just saying, go out and land grab. And I think that that's problematic because it might work now, but in 2 to 3 years when all these cases come through the courts and the regulatory rules are made, whether it's in Europe or whether it's here domestically, there's going to be a lot of fallout. And I think that one of the things that if I was investing into this space now, I'd be very mindful about looking at the way Sri's looking at it, because 2 to 3 years from now, you might see a high failure rate if all of a sudden there's a regime that comes in that takes away your ability to use these models that you built up over the last couple of years.
Can I ask you a question, Jason, before we get too far away from it? You talked about Google and Reddit. Did I hear you say that Google has made a deal with Reddit to access Reddit in their AI? Or?
Yeah, so I think that it came out about like 10 days ago, yes. Yeah. And so I think I suspect, though I don't have any inside knowledge, that this was part of Reddit's push to go public. So Reddit just filed their S1, which anybody in this room is interested in the business of data licensing or search results. It's a fascinating read. But yes, about $60 million. I think it was about over 3 years, so I think the total deal is about $200 million.
Because out of all of the databases of information, I don't know that if I had a generative AI company, I would want to train it using Reddit.
But I mean, like from a business perspective, it is maybe one of the largest data sets out there. It's curated to a certain extent by moderators, and it's fairly comprehensive. I mean, almost every topic under the sun has a subreddit. So from a data quality perspective, it depends on what paradigm you're looking at. It may or may not be a good model to train on, but if you just want a large data set that has a lot of passionate users building content for your large language model, there probably isn't a better one. And you can get a license to it. So from a legal perspective, it's something that you actually can have some confidence that as long as Reddit's terms of service are such that it allows for this, Google can take a license and use it.
So, Sri, let me ask you this question because, I'm serious. I would if somebody came to me and wanted me to invest in an AI company and they told me, oh yeah, we got a big chunk of our data, our training data from Reddit. The conversation would end right there for me because I see what gets posted on Reddit, and not all of it is bad, but a lot of it is, there's no punctuation, it's not spelled properly, it's, a whole host of issues from a data quality perspective, not the least of which is often they're wrong. I mean, there are these people talking amongst themselves, convinced in their accuracy. Sometimes it's astonishing how they can convince themselves that they're right about something that they're completely wrong about. But is that the type of thing that you concern yourself with? Do you get down to that level?
We do. This wouldn't be for us, but I can see where this would actually make business sense. We don't do consumer goods. We're always B2B software companies. So this wouldn't play for us so much. But if I had a company that was coming to us and saying, look, we're going to start allowing stodgy companies to talk to millennials or the next generation up. And the way that they're going to do that is they're going to take the stodgy person, write up a sentence, run it through a Reddit trained filter, and then come up with the same sentence spoken in 20-year-old language. That might be an actual use case that you would say, this actually makes sense for using this data set to actually use the grammar that audience would understand.
Right. Okay.
So yes, I made that all it is not something that we would do in general.
Right. Yeah. No. But I mean, I get your point. I just think to myself, there are. I'm not sure that you would want to train your AI to. If you were trying to create an AI that could teach language skills, you wouldn't go to certain parts of the Deep South and then use that dialect and expect that you're going to have an AI that's going to teach somebody who's coming to New York City for a job using that data. I mean, it's just.
But that would be a different use case, and so it would be the wrong data for that use case. But if you wanted to run a consumer or a customer service chatbot that was communicating with people in Mississippi, maybe it makes sense to have your data set be the way that people talk from Mississippi.
Okay, so let me ask you this: do you think that's where the future of the companies are? Is in so specific use cases? Because it seems like everybody's running to dominate the world right now, and it can do everything. It can. It doesn't do everything well, though.
We're a Series A investor. We only invest in companies, and we are really focused on getting our companies to be acquired by someone else. So we're really focused on solving specific problems. Mm-hmm. And so what I'm really focused on is data for specific problems. So there's also, and we haven't talked about it much, but there's also a slight bifurcation in how we should talk about AI. There's sometimes where you're using AI to help the company's employees do things. Programmers looking up solutions to how to write a specific thing, customer service people talking about how do I respond to a customer, internal stuff. And then what we've been talking a lot more about externally, this is going to be part of our product that's visible to the outside world. In my world, when we're talking to programmers or people inside the company, they're like, well, we use I'm going to go with ChatGPT, but any generative AI model to help me write my code. Huge red flags throw up right away. First thing is when we tell all of our companies the exact same thing, which is that's great if you're using it to kind of help you think about how to solve or write some code. That is horrible if you're copying and pasting that code. We never let any of our companies copy and paste the code for a lot of different reasons. One, I have no clue what the quality of that code is. It was trained up on by a bunch of people whom I don't know in styles that I have no clue about, that doesn't match our style. It may solve the problem, but it's really better for saying, I didn't know how to figure out this problem, and here's one solution that works. Let me take it, let me learn what they did, let me apply it to my code. The customer service example, it's more of a human plus than a human replacement. It is, I need a customer service rep that can really respond to a lot of questions. I need them ramped up fast. Let me train them up on what all of our past customer service people and what our engineers have done in the product itself. And then if they get stumped by a question, they can run to our internal LLM, get a quick response, at least read it, understand what we are doing, and then provide a solution. It helps them be more efficient at answering questions. That's where we see the better value of it than trying to replace humans, because it's not there yet.
So I'm curious how you're actually enforcing that. So are you having them, like, are you forcing a certain policy, or is it more, is that the board level, or is, like, how are you functionally doing that when you're
So
working with
while we do sit on boards of companies and while we do help, the limit of what I can do is really advise. So the way in which we enforce it is put the fear of God in them. Basically, talk to management team, explain to them what could go wrong if they don't do this and they don't enforce it within their teams. Explain how we will not be there to save them if they go down this path, and then convince them that it is in their best interest to work with their people to follow our guidelines.
So what are you seeing, Jason, in terms of the companies that are coming to you, and when do they come to you for help? Sri, are you sending them to Jason, or Jason, you sending them to Sri, or does it go both ways? And I don't mean it to be like you know, like unethical business. That's not what I'm saying.
It's not like a revolving door.
No. But like, where do you get involved? Like somebody comes to you and says, "Hey, I got this, and I can help you with the IP stuff, but you need to talk to somebody like Sri or like these people who can get you funding." Or Sri, the people come to you first and say, "Hey, you need to talk to somebody like Jason because these are the concerns I have on the IP side."
So I mean, I would say from my perspective, I think the best relationships I have is when I have a good working relationship with the product teams, you know, which in the startup world would be like usually the founders. Mm-hmm. But in the larger companies, it's having a good relationship with the engineers that are building these things, the product managers, because they're the ones in the front lines actually building it. And because the technology is still relatively nascent, especially in a commercial setting, we don't know what's going to happen with the cases and the laws and the legal regulations. If we have a good working relationship, you build trust with them, you can advise them as they're building at the earliest stages. And so from a best practices perspective, you want to make sure that you really have a good working relationship with the people actually on the front lines building, so that you know, and that you can have that free flow of information and advise them at the right stages. But when do they actually come to me? Yeah. With the clients that I have, again, deep relationships with, it is early. But sometimes they're coming to me later. They're like, "Oh, we're looking to raise our seed round or our Series A round, and now we got this due diligence list, and they're asking for what was your model trained on?" Or like I'm seeing things in certain licensing contracts where you're looking to like they're selling their AI-enabled software to a client, and then there's a question coming back from the other side about what is it, like what do the reps and warranties look like in your licensing contract, and if they're asking to have a rep and warranty related to the LLMs or the data that's being provided, we need to know what they actually did in that product in order to be able to provide a rep and warranty, because we don't want to sink our company by promising an unlimited liability cap on the data that the LLM was trained on, and then all of a sudden you get sued, like your client gets sued and their customer gets sued, and that, you know, you're on the hook for a multi-million-dollar judgment that they may or may not be able to pay.
So Sri already mentioned that, you know, that they lie all the time. We laugh and we joke about it, but that's true, right? I mean, they say what they think they need to say. Do you see that problem as well? And how do you solve for that risk yourself?
Well, I mean, I think in that case you need to make sure, like, part of us as lawyers, it's about like documenting it and making sure that you're asking the right questions and that you're probing them and that you're not doing something where it obviously looks wrong. I mean, like we as, I think, attorneys have an ethical responsibility to represent our clients appropriately. And so you do need to ask those questions, dig into it. And from a personal reputation perspective, attorney ethics aside, if I see something like that, that's something I'm not going to move forward with.
Right.
And that's where kind of I step in, especially with a lot of these clients, is knowing whom to send them to. So in this room, we're talking obviously about AI, and in reference a lot to IP. The thing is that AI brings in so many new things. So everyone comes to us, all of our companies come to us, and they say, well, either I have a patent or I'm going to get a patent. And the first question is, of why? Like, this is AI. So a lot of times, a lot of my job is to explain to them what are the issues that they have and what are the right means in which they can protect themselves. Should it be a patent? Should it be a trade secret? Should it just be a secret? Should they really be looking at more trademark, more branding, more marketing because of how they're doing it? Is it something that doesn't need to go through the full expense of a trade secret, but maybe just keep it as a secret? What are the privacy issues? What are the cybersecurity issues? Once I can kind of get them thinking more broadly, then sending them to a lawyer or law firm that really can handle those. And so if my suggestion to everyone in this room is, especially the lawyers, is start to learn about the rest of IP, not just patents, and some of the other issues, the antitrust issues that are going to be coming down, copyright issues, but also data privacy, data security, cybersecurity issues, because those are the ones where all of this, especially for AI, all of this kind of gets intermingled. And if you can be the advisor, mentor, that's who someone like me is going to send you to. So I leverage Jason, I leverage some others that I know can really talk about those issues and dig into them and do the issue spotting that needs to be done at that level.
Well, and also, I mean, like provide business opportunities. I mean, like the regulations that are going to come in and the way that the different licensing structures are going to evolve in this space really are going to create the ability for your clients to generate revenue. I mean, like going back to the data licensing model, I mean, there's going to be opportunities for all of this content that was created over the last 40, 50, 60, 70 years that's to be monetized through licensing in the same way that music has been in music in the streaming world. So I think that on the other side of it, there's opportunities for us to think about the ways to enhance our clients' bottom line by either using intellectual property strategies or licensing strategies.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I've got a question. It seems like, people can sort of get worried about AI because it's going to take over. And yet, like you said, Jason, we have all these laws that everybody in this room is trained on and can explain. I mean, that is kind of the nuts and bolts of intellectual property in this country. And it's not like it's all going to just melt away because AI is here. We will work AI into our system, but AI is not taking over.
I completely agree with you. I think that, and the comment for anybody that's streaming was that that the nuts and bolts of intellectual property law isn't going to change over just because artificial intelligence has shown up. And I think that that's absolutely right. I mean, these are new technologies that are creating new issues in the world, but we have, the Copyright Act and the Patent Act and all of the case law that's been developed here in the United States over the last couple of centuries hasn't gone away. And so that for those of us that are advising clients on how to build things using artificial intelligence, we have to be mindful about those frameworks because they're not going to change, or at least not yet.
You mentioned guidelines. Do you convey those in written form to them, or do you just talk to them?
Normally within the first 2 or 3 meetings I have with them, I'll sit down and Jason and I have kind of come up with a presentation to kind of give them, to walk them through. So remember, these people have never really thought about IP at all. Like, that's why they keep coming back with the word patents, because that's what everyone has ever heard. So we talk to them about what are the different forms, what is their value, how do all of these work towards building your brand, how do you figure out what should or shouldn't be in each of the different categories, and then let them take that back to their team and have their team work on it. The reason for that is if they can at least create some structure around that and they can provide it to someone like Jason or an attorney, that gets rid of a lot of what we see the problem side of this is, which is I see a lot of companies go to an attorney and say, I want a patent on X, and the attorney gets the patent on X, and no one asks why. The attorney assumes that the company knows the business reason for it. The company assumes the attorney would never get a patent that didn't have any business value, and we end up with something that has no strategy behind it. And so with this kind of document, they can go and speak and have a good consultative meeting with their attorney and then build a real strategy around it.
And for the audience, the question was whether the guidelines that Sri was talking about were written. I think that it depends upon the sophistication of the company and the people that you're dealing with. I mean, the people that are building artificial intelligence technologies tend to be very, very bright. And like they tend to be very capable of absorbing these things. And a lot of times in this space, they're not only just bright about the technology, but they are really bright and knowledgeable about the way that the policy is developing, the way that these cases are moving forward. And so I found that sometimes it is helpful to actually write something out, but a lot of times you don't have to go quite that far. At least I haven't had to with the early stage clients. Now on the corporate side, it really depends again on the sophistication of the clients. And sometimes actually I find they can be the toughest to work with because they may have been doing things in a certain way and they haven't necessarily needed to have the deep level of interaction with counsel depending on what they're building, particularly at the earliest stages. Because again, I think that this is something that's been brought up in the other panels as well. If you're building something that has a very large data set, you can go down a path that it's very, very difficult to unwind data that would be potentially infringing that you might have to remove later.
Do we have any other questions?
Oh, one.
This is encouraging, actually. This is great. How widespread, I guess, Sri, within the venture community amongst your peers is this view? Because you listen to people like Andreessen and others, it's all fair use, nothing to see.
It's not widespread yet, but it's gaining spread. So typically, you guys are, lawyers, the general public is hearing things from the largest of the VCs, the Andreessen Horowitz, the Sequoias, the anyways, you guys know all the names. They're very, very late stage and at a different stage. On the earlier side, though, the message is starting to get through a lot more. There are still a lot of funds that just say, how many patents do you have? And that's the extent of their analysis of either AI or IP, which makes no sense at all. But there are a lot of firms that are starting to think more strategically about it as they learn more about it.
And I think to the other end, once we see a couple of cases come through, and if there's one big judgment, I think is going to be all that it takes for people to start looking at it differently.
Long way, though. I mean, what if Getty loses or New York Times loses, right? I mean,
Right.
Just the fact that the lawsuit happened is going to be enough to scare a lot of them. So for a lot of our companies, they can't afford to be in, especially even the larger ones, patent or trade secret fight for 3 to 5 years. That puts a huge cloud over them. They're going to want to be able to get rid of that quickly, and that's what's going to lead to better decisions.
And I think though that if they start going in a different direction, and I think that from my perspective, I'd be surprised if that actually happens, which was the reason why I answered your question the way that I did. But if it does, then I think that you're right. You will see venture capitalists maybe even double down, or you're going to see technologists in a certain way double down. But I think that, there has been talked about a lot in the panels already, that it's not going to be just these lawsuits. There's going to be the regulations that come out in Europe. There's going to be the various state laws that come out. In certain disciplines, you're going to see like the FDA come out and probably regulate artificial intelligence technologies that are related to medical devices or certain kinds of diagnostics. So I don't think that there's just going to be one lawsuit or one law that gets passed that's going to completely regulate this. This is going to be a massive market
Yeah.
that's coming forward.
In a lot of different ways. So it might be lawsuits. It might be access to the federal government contracts might be, permeated on certain certifications. Selling into educational systems is probably going to be certain safety certifications. So getting access to Europe is going to be living by their laws. I think there's going to be a lot of different ways and a lot of different things that are going to incentivize companies to try to follow these guidelines a little bit better.
Yeah, I think that's got to be the outcome here, right? I mean, because one, if the copyright cases go the wrong way, then I don't know what future AI has. Because if you just take all these data bases and without paying for them, and you don't have to worry about a copyright issue on the input, you don't have to worry about a copyright issue on the output. Well, it's going to become untenable for copyright owners and content creators to exist in that world. And we see what the models are doing when they're learning on their own output, and it's pretty pathetic. It's pretty awful. I mean, have you, Sri, and then Jason, the same question, have you seen people trying to solve that problem, like with the AI learning from itself, and what have you seen in that space, if anything, yet?
A lot of our companies are a little too early for that. And a lot of our companies, I can't imagine that they would do it on purpose. And for the reason for it is any sort of error that propagates into that is only going to get worse and worse over time. And so you're just going to get worse here. The bigger problem is going to be when we have data that we think is real data that happen to be AI generated or AI filled in, bad actors changing data, even just loss of data or bias within who the data is collected from. Those are the types of things that kind of worry me and a lot of our companies, is more of those issues accidentally happening rather than building algorithms that are training themselves on their own output.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about it also from like a market problem, or like the thing I started at the beginning of this was thinking about actually solving customer problems. And your comment or your question made me think about the Spotify algorithm about like serving up music that you like. Eventually it gets very reductive. And I think that that's a problem that's out there that I haven't seen a good solution yet. So if anybody in the room has seen a good solution to solving the issue of algorithms becoming reductive and kind of collapsing down on like the least common denominator in their results, I'd love to see who's trying to solve that problem. In fact, I may go on a research mission after this to find that.
I think Judge Michelle hit it on the nose. Look, that's not an AI issue. That, we have echo chambers throughout all of the country right now, whether you're Republican, Democrat, left, right, it doesn't really matter. There's echo chambers, and you're only getting fed the same information over and over and over again. That exists independent of AI.
Right, well, but an AI is only in some ways accelerating that or making it worse.
Well, and I think it is, and not to get into like a political conversation here, but I think AI is making it worse simply based on the technology itself. Because I think when we did this program last year, ChatGPT had really just come out in a big way. The public was really aware of what was going on, and everybody was playing with it. And you would ask it a question, and people were amazed that, wow, this is just so smart. And I asked questions, and I got back. The reason why people thought it was smart was it would give you like 3-paragraph answer. The first paragraph parroted exactly what you told it, right? And then the last paragraph, in summary, parroted what you told it.
It's like what bar reteaches you when you take the bar exam.
Right, yeah. But the thing was, it was so much confirmation bias in these answers. Of course you think ChatGPT is a genius when 2/3 of its answer is your own question, right? But now you take those garbage answers and you feed it to it again as a training, and it unravels very quickly. And I understand it's about relationships, and you're looking for, this word next to that word kind of thing, and predictive and that sort of thing. But is it me, or when you look at these like generative AI, the wording seems to be somebody who has like English as a second language at best. And it's
Well-
not that it's not using the English language, it's but the phraseology is strange.
Well, so if you think about it, yes, a lot of stuff on the internet is written in English, but the majority of the world's population are not English as a first language speakers. So a lot of the stuff that it's been trained on is not from native English speakers. So it kind of makes sense that it wouldn't sound like a native American speaker.
Yeah, but then when it goes to learn from itself,
Then it gets even worse.
then it gets
Well,
even worse.
But I mean, these models are improving over time, and I think that if you like sort of would take snapshots of the various OpenAI models up until now, if you get to the version 4, it'd be very interesting to see where they go next. It's getting better, and I suspect that as the developers continue to refine these models and refine the way that the outputs come out, over time that's going to be a problem that gets solved.
But and if we talk about assessing risk, for a lot of our companies, especially we have one or two that are building their own generative AI models, it is really assessing where they're pulling that data from. Yes, it requires a lot of data to do it. That doesn't excuse being not having a strong policy about making sure you're getting good data. It doesn't excuse laziness at all.
Right. Yeah, but that's and you know,
And I
there's-
can, so I have the advantage of I'm holding the purse strings, so I can kind of force it.
Yeah.
That's not normal.
Well, no, but that's good that you do that. I mean, because I do think it's an unacceptable level of risk what some of the companies are doing. You know, and I would like to think that it's, you know, let's get it, we'll train it, we'll fix it, we'll make it better, and then once we get it right, then we'll purge it, and then we'll treat it, then we'll feed it with stuff that is correct, information that's good, information that's curated for whatever purpose we need it for, you know, and you know, and if we're a left-leaning publication or a right-leaning publication, you could feed it your own stuff, but I think it needs to be stuff that you curated yourself or are comfortable with it using. And I don't see an awful lot of that concern out there, and I don't get it. I think Martin had it exactly right. These companies are racing to get out in front with stuff that's not yet ready for prime time.
They're racing right now, but you know, we've seen this with AI, and we've seen this with really every technology we ever have had. There is a hype cycle followed by a time in which we all start to really dislike the solution because it didn't live up to the promise. Mm-hmm. I think you're going to see that happen even with generative models, especially as they start to suggest that people commit suicide and do other things that are generally across our consuming public thought of as bad ideas, unacceptable solutions, unacceptable responses. And then there will be kind of a pushback, okay, we need some way to address that. And I do think that there are ways that can happen that don't require the legislature to do it, maybe through certifications, maybe through standards, maybe through other ways, reputational harm. And so you'll see a pullback because those that raced out there, my only fear is that those that race out there are going to poison the well so badly that no one ever trusts the thing again.
So do you think that that's actually going to happen in this case? Because, I mean, the expectations are so high and that the projections of the market value are so high that investors like yourself or others will continue to invest in this space in a way that, I don't know, do you think it's similar to, there was a massive pullback in crypto and Web3 over the past couple of years. Do you think that that's possibly going to happen in AI as well?
I agree with Sri. I think that there's going to be a massive pullback. I mean, like, take for instance, Jason, if you were one of the attorneys, or a partner of one of these attorneys who submitted something that wound up getting sanctioned because the AI made it all up, what would you think about?
Well, I mean,
and
that's an
you would
interesting
want-
case because that's an AI-related problem. But
Right.
I mean, the problem there was that the attorney submitted something he didn't write,
Right.
and that he didn't review.
Right.
It wouldn't have mattered whether that was his associate or his paralegal that helped him draft it, and he just turned it in, and it was riddled full of errors. It was a document that was riddled full of errors, regardless of whether
For whatever reason, right?
Exactly. Like
Right.
the artificial intelligence was really, as far as I'm concerned, was just a bystander in that case.
Right, but the thing, I don't know that I agree with that simply because I think, and I think we agree with what happened in the facts, but
Right.
the reason why I'm going down that path is I think what you're going to see is because I have in my head, and so I know what all the panels are basically going to cover. So tomorrow we're going to have a governance panel, and during the pre-call, one of the people said, I would rather have not the perfect policy, but a policy that my
policy.
people are going to follow.
Yeah, amen.
Right? Okay, so we'll have that conversation tomorrow, but that's where I'm going right now, right? So, like, can you really trust your people not to be using this thing that they think is just the greatest thing since sliced bread because they're too young to understand or appreciate the risk? And if the answer is yes, and I think for some companies the answer will be yes, then maybe you have to say, well, then none of you can use this. You just can't use it because we can't trust it because look at what happened to...
I think what will happen is they will probably use it, but they will be very careful to double check it because of what just happened.
And I think it depends on what your use case is and like what is your company. If you're a bank and you have an AI that's running like the money and moving money in your organization, you're going to want to be very careful about that. If you have a proprietary software system that you're licensing and that the purity of your code for some reason really matters, you're not going to necessarily want those software developers using GitHub Copilot
Right.
to
Or
write your
other issues.
applications. But if it's a situation where it's not that sensitive, you can have a policy that's much more permissive. But like you want to have guidelines and a policy that your people are going to actually
And
follow.
I think
And then
the guidelines are going to have to be there, and there is a lot of teeth around in other legal issues. So, for example, in the earlier panel, we talked a little bit about using AI in education. Anything that would be put in. So we have one company that does provide counseling to kids. You would have to. You can imagine what they have to go through around what they use to teach that model, such that it does. It flags the right things. It doesn't suggest anything incorrect. It doesn't say anything incorrect. There are all sorts of safeguards around that, and there need to be. So I think the usage of it is all right as long as there's enough human touches around the solution to make sure that what comes out is appropriate.
Okay, so we're rapidly running out of time here. I want to give both of you guys the opportunity to give your final thoughts. What do you think? And I'll ask different questions, but related to what it is that you do. So, Sri, you're the money guys. What do you think people who are starting these companies that are getting to the point where they need VC funding on some level, what should they be thinking about? And Jason, sort of the lawyer's version of that is, the people, when they're starting these companies in the AI space, what should they be focusing on from the legal perspective? Sri, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so my comment to a lot of our companies is this is not a first mover advantage race. This is a correct mover advantage race. A lot of the ones that get out there first are going to fail, and they're going to fail miserably. And you don't want to be that. You want to make sure, we want our companies to make sure that they're doing it correctly, even if it takes a little longer to get there.
Good, great.
And I think I'm going to piggyback on that from the legal perspective is that you want to be mindful that this is early times from a legal perspective. You want to focus on the fundamentals of what IP law is and what the ground rules are for patents and copyrights and the other legal issues related to building your company, and know that it might change. And so build your company with optionality so that you can move forward no matter what happens.
Great. Awesome. Thank you very much for a great conversation.